I'm an urban planner. Bone mentioned, I actually, as I like to joke, say that I'm the only one that I know that went into freight on purpose. Most folks, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, one of the biggest challenges that we have in the freight world is that we're finally getting a little bit of attention. Folks are finally getting a little interested in this. But when we do actually create positions that can focus on freight, we often fill them with people who don't actually know anything about freight, which is almost more dangerous than if we didn't have anybody working on freight at all. So take that with a grain of salt, if you will. Freight is, and I stand by this, the most important, most misunderstood, and most complex part of transportation planning. Us freight planners sort of got that point across during COVID. Folks realized just how important goods movement is. If we didn't move, we were okay. If the goods didn't move, we were not okay. And that's not just, that's our day-to-day goods that are being delivered, as well as the emergency supplies and equipment. And it's important to note that we have a really big problem in the freight industry. We use a million different terms to mean the same thing. It feels like more so than any other industry, which is really unnecessary. But when I say things like logistics, shipping, delivery, supply chain, goods movement, and trucking, those are all interchangeable with freight. And that should be how folks here think about that. Okay. So what is included in freight specifically? We have parcels, so that's e-commerce, boxes, it's mail, things like that. That's coming to you mostly by, carrying companies like UPS and Amazon and the postal services. Construction materials, that's freight. Waste, oh, here we go. Thank you, Paula. You can just scroll.
Okay.
And the next one.
Okay.
One more. Here we go. Okay, so these are all the different types of goods that we move by multimodal vehicles. I'll talk mostly about last mile and surface transportation, but this is the overview of what we mean when we say freight. So it's not just your package from Amazon, it's a whole host of different items that are being delivered and that is impacting our lives. If you have ever purchased anything and you have ever thrown anything away, you are a part of the system and you play a very significant role. Okay, next slide. So I like to use the term mobility and transportation and highlight the fact that when many folks talk about this issue, they do not include freight. Often you hear it's a car-free street or we're doing something car-free, but they don't just mean cars, they also mean trucks and motorcycles and other groups. You see a lot of mobility pyramids out there. Here's an example from the European Commission, from the European Union, and it shows, here are all different ways and different modes for mobility. And again, they mean passenger mobility. So just something to consider when you're listening to folks talk or when you're talking about transportation, that, start to pay attention of whether or not you're talking about passenger transportation or freight transportation and how that's sort of being explained. Okay, next slide. So just going to lay out the misconceptions, and I'll go through some more details with the rest of the slides. Currently, other transportation planners, elected officials, transportation environmental advocates, and the public misunderstands freight and misunderstands the system. And I want to have a little asterisk. I am here to explain all the different sides to each other. I'm sort of that middle of the Venn diagram between the industry, between businesses, the public, engineers, elected officials, and more. And in no way am I saying freight industry is perfect and everything they do is great. But right now, I just want to highlight some of the misconceptions that comes from the advocate and public community. Freight is, oh, sorry, nope, stay on there. So big tickets. Freight is private. We don't need to do anything about it. Well, actually, it's not. And government does a lot of stuff for people's personal vehicles. Obviously, you guys know more than most. We allow a lot of free parking for people's personal cars that are, used, less than 90% of the time. But we don't think about this infrastructure for freight, and freight's actually impacting all of us. All truck fleets are not big. You can't just think about companies like UPS and Amazon. There are a lot of trucking companies that are quite small. High tech is not always best. That's obviously true for many, many fields. Trucking companies are not all those big players that have a lot of money, and they can't all afford to um, transition to cleaner vehicles. Fines alone will not solve the problem. We have more and more cameras on the fronts of buses that are going to do some fines when any vehicle is parked in a bus lane. If there's no good alternative, it's not going to stop anything from happening. Increased delivery costs are not always able to be passed down to the consumer. It's a big challenge when it comes to congestion pricing and other types of fee structures. There's a common misconception that the delivery drivers don't care about safety. Their safety is also a big issue that they obviously need to consider. So they are concerned about other vulnerable road users, but they themselves are stepping into traffic and doing work in the roadway and need to be very careful. Pedestrianized areas. We talk a lot in the industry about how we should get rid of cars. We should pedestrianize areas like Europe. Wouldn't that be great? Yes, it would, but only if you consider deliveries, because spoiler alert, in those European cities, their deliveries for pedestrianized areas are really, really problematic because it's not properly considered in their planning. As I mentioned earlier, we're finally getting some attention, and we are getting more and more freight offices being developed in different departments of transportation across the US and the world, but they are often managed by non-freight experts. And finally, the misconception that we are not part of the problem, but of course we are. Okay, next slide. Quick overview. So this is sort of all types of trucks, not just last mile. March of last year, there were almost 600,000 active trucking companies registered with Federal Department of Transportation, FMCSA, that own at least one tractor. It doesn't even mean the trailer. That just means the front part of a big truck, or just the front part. From those, almost 100% were fewer than 100 trucks. 95.5% operated 10 or fewer trucks. So I put this stat out there to help folks recognize that a lot of companies are owner operators. They may only have one truck, and they do not have a lot of cushion to make some really big changes that we all need them to, which is why we really need government support. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to talk specifically about last mile. That's where my expertise and experience lies. And when we say last mile, we mean that last step from the last distribution warehouse store to the final receiver. And the receiver is most likely consumers in our home, or it could be to a store that could actually be the final receiver. Next slide. All right, curb competition. We know that this is a problem, right? Everybody wants access to the curb. We want bike parking, bike lanes, bus stops, bus lanes, drop off, pick up and drop off for hire vehicles. We need access to the curb for garbage trucks, for loading and unloading traditional freight trucks, and there's no room left, right? Personally, if we could move to only pick up and drop off of goods and people, that'd be great. No other sort of permanent or long-term parking. That would be the best solution, but we're not there yet. Next slide. So one of the biggest challenges with last mile delivery is it's a really, really high cost when you're looking at the full supply chain transportation. So if there are fees that need to be paid at the curb, you have to pay those fees. If there's illegal parking, which we'll talk a little bit more in a moment, you got to pay those fines. There's the cost of fuel. There's congestion, which equals time and fuel, and that equals money. You have what's called the failed first attempt, which is, you ever get that little sign on your door that says, "Sorry, we missed you, FedEx. We're gonna have to come back another day, or you're gonna have to come to a warehouse to pick it up." When you have that failed first attempt, it means that company is going to try a second time and maybe even a third time, which takes a lot of time and money. There's reverse logistics and returns. So, you're sending something back, you're doing your free shipping, free return. And then, of course, labor. Okay, next. Okay, so curb management. So this is a photo I have on my website. I think many of you have probably experienced this somewhere in your city. My favorite part of this is I'm assuming that he's not just tired, but the guy in the middle is just exasperated by what's happening with his hand on his head. This is an overwhelming amount of packages. And when we don't haven't designed our curbs and our cities properly, it can be very overwhelming. And here they're actually against the curb, so that's great. But we need proper loading zones. Loading zones are needed, but they have to be done properly. We need access to the curb that's specific to trucks or commercial vehicles, depending on how your municipality defines them. There have to be enough of them. They have to be sized correctly because it's not just about the vehicle. There may be a lift gate. There may need to be some staging and organizing of packages before they go into a hand truck, which you see in this photo. You've got that failed first attempt where now a truck's going to have to go around, and if they're in a rush, they're double parking. That's going to happen. And then, of course, we have overnight parking, which is a really, really big challenge internationally, as well as even last mile. So there's very few places, safe places for truck drivers to park overnight. And so that's a really, really big challenge. Next slide. So we'll dive a little bit more into some of the biggest challenges and the reasons why we're having some of these issues at the curb. So first, when you order something and you have free shipping, you're encouraged to order multiples, right? If you want to go get a t-shirt at the store and you go to the store, you'll try things on and you'll get the one size. If you're ordering something online, well, I'm not quite sure what size I'm going to buy them in 3 different sizes or 2 different sizes and maybe 2 different colors. I'll see what I like. And because it's free shipping or even free returns, I can just send it back. That's not a problem for me. But then we all complain about the trucks parked in the bike lanes and the bus lanes. And that's a huge challenge. And we're a big part of that. So not only do we end up ordering more, we're also going to create more waste. Because if you're going to the store and buying a shirt and you're bringing a reusable tote, there's not a lot of waste there because that t-shirt's coming to that store in a very big pallet of other shirts. So it's very minimal packaging. If you've now ordered multiples to your home and then you have to ship it back out, that is a lot of packaging. And with a lot of packaging, there's an environmental concern. And now we have another truck that needs to be on the road to collect the waste. So it's another garbage truck that needs to actually be on the roads. And a lot of this is based on what's the replacement trip? Are you getting a delivery by a truck and it's replacing a car trip and you have an internal combustion engine, but the truck is electric and might be delivering for multiple addresses versus multiple dirty cars going to a store? Oh, well then environmentally that might not be so bad. So maybe having free shipping isn't such a terrible thing. But if that truck is replacing a bike, ped, or transit trip, that's really problematic, right? And so free shipping sort of encourages, oh yeah, I'll just order everything online instead of going to a store on foot or taking transit or cycling, which also can do a big disservice to our local businesses and sort of our active streets. And then just a nice little statistic here, no surprise, it's really, really hard for experts to estimate the increase in e-commerce. And COVID just totally blew the door open on that. We really have no idea. Things have just, gone total gangbusters. And, folks that weren't comfortable shopping online have since gotten used to it and now might be ordering everything online, even if they're going back into the office or part of their life is going back to normal because they've gotten used to this new service that's quite frankly very convenient. Okay, next. The other challenge, and this can be tied to some free shipping options, is same day or next day. So we have this sense of urgency, right? And so if you need something right away and there's no access to the curb for your delivery driver, they're going to double park. Because if that doesn't get there in time, the shipper, that company that sent you the item, they're not getting into trouble. The carrier is. If FedEx doesn't get that to you in trouble, you're going to call and complain to FedEx, right? So they need to get to you as fast as possible because it's a business problem. And that is worth an illegal fine. So it doesn't matter if you put a camera on the front of a bus, if there's no alternative, that's not going to change their behavior. And so these are some of the issues that a lot of other transportation planners think or don't think of. And they think, oh, here's a solution without understanding how freight operations work. We also have hours of service. Truck drivers, there's a limit to how many hours they can be on the road. So if you are stuck in a very congested city, you're running out of time. And the schedule you have for that particular shift can only go so long. So these are some challenges that happens. Now, I just want to draw your attention to the parts on the trucks that I circled here. So why are there two FedEx trucks at the same address at the same time, right? Sort of sounds crazy. But if you look, one is ground and one is express because somebody wanted that same day or next day, and other folks said it's okay if it doesn't take me a long time. But because of that, we end up with lack of consolidation, right? And so less efficiency because we've got this big sense of urgency by the folks that are delivering something express. Okay, next slide. So some of the solutions are, what would consolidation look like? So A, do you really need those shoes today, right? How many of the actual deliveries and orders that people are making online really need to be there same day? But sometimes you order it because that could be the default. And if it's free shipping, why wouldn't I choose same day, next day? The problem is we need companies to pull that and really encourage more and more shoppers to actually order things to consolidate with folks in their area, in their neighborhood, or what have you. And companies are starting to do this. You know, you can check, yes, I'm okay having it come a little bit later if the rest of my neighbors are going to have something come around that time, but we're really not at the level that we need to be. So today, typically have a bunch of different companies delivering to a bunch of different addresses, but each of these companies is going to every single one of these addresses. In a consolidated plan, the goal is to use things like urban consolidation centers and a couple of other examples I'll talk about in a moment, bring all those goods to one location, organize and consolidate, and then you only have one vehicle going to each of these final addresses. It makes things far more efficient. And if you have fewer trucks going to the that last mile, that's less competition at the curb, which is really the biggest challenge here. Next slide. So some other consolidation opportunities. So you have urban consolidation centers that are more or less at the periphery of a city. And then you have micro hubs, which are becoming more and more popular. Portland just put out an RFP to learn more about their micro hub program. New York City DOT just launched their first micro hub. We see these all over Europe. These are places, and I apologize to the Australians, I don't have good insights on some of the micro hub work in your area, but this can be anything from a storefront, or something like a dark kitchen or dark store, or it could be a shipping container, like this first photo in the top, shipping container in a parking lot, can be a couple of empty parking spaces on the street or in a parking lot. It could even be a truck. It's just parked on a parking space on a street and then has dedicated space outside to actually do some consolidation where folks can then deliver by smaller vehicles or even a hand truck. And then, of course, delivery lockers, which is sort of the hyper local version of a micro hub. These exist in public spaces, and you see them in a lot of multifamily homes too, in mailrooms. And the big joke that the University of Washington, I think they actually came up with this term, is, you know, we have the last mile, right? And then we also have the last 50 feet, which is more or less a locker to you, or what's called the slipper distance, because you're willing to go there in your slippers. It's not that far away. Next slide. So, okay, we've got this competition at the curb. Things can be really dirty at the curb. So how do we reduce this in addition to using consolidation practices? What are some vehicle challenges we have? Well, you know, everyone says, oh, let's just do EVs. That's the solution. Well, we all know that, you know, yes, you might not have emissions where the vehicle is actually moving, but we know that we don't have a clean grid. We know that the grid isn't ready for as many electric vehicles as we'd like. And when it comes to trucks and vans specifically, it is incredibly expensive. And so there are all these programs and policies that a lot of cities are putting into place because they're talking to their environmental and sustainability teams and not also the freight teams that understand how freight operations work. So you'll have laws that say, okay, everybody has to be electric by a certain date, or you're going to get fined if you continue using dirty vehicles, and we're not going to help you. We're not going to help give you a subsidy, but we're going to give people subsidies for their personal vehicles, right? Well, that doesn't really make sense. This truck is moving all of our stuff in it. That person's private car, they can take a bus, right? Not always that easy for freight. And so the picture at the top, that's Amazon Rivian. I'm sure you have all seen these trucks. There was a huge backlog. Amazon and I believe UPS and a bunch of other companies had paid for this Rivian electric vans, and there was a supply chain shortage. Many, many months, maybe even a year delay. So even when a company can afford to convert fleets to electric, they're not always ready. So this is a huge issue, and too few advocates and elected officials and environmental groups don't recognize that we can't simply switch. And we know that you can't just plug in an existing electric vehicle charger, right? That's the other thing. Cities, governments are not only subsidizing someone purchasing a personal electric vehicle, but we're building out an amazing charging infrastructure network. Under the Biden administration in the US, we were starting to see a network of truck electric charging stations being built out, but it's not nearly at the rate that we need. And again, the grid really isn't ready for it. And then, of course, batteries are really heavy, and trucks create a lot of wear and tear on our roads. And when they're heavier, it does even more damage and can make them far less safe during a crash. Cargo bikes, hopefully many of you have seen cargo bikes. They come in all shapes and sizes. You can actually get a decent amount of goods into these. You can really only 2 or 3 are needed to provide the equivalent amount of space as what you would see in a traditional delivery truck or van. And that's often because some of these trucks and vans have an empty middle aisle, right? So that the delivery driver can walk through and organize their packages, whereas in a cargo bike, the entire thing is filled with packages. They're a lot more nimble. They can get through some pedestrianized areas only, and they're going to take up a lot less space at the curb, which again is one of the big issues we're talking about. And then finally, cargo hitching, which is not talked about enough in this country, is, we can actually move passengers and freight together in the same place. That's what we do with our planes. We actually have a lot of cargo in the belly of passenger planes, which folks don't realize. And of course, there's also cargo-only jets, but more and more folks are looking at, can we move goods by either passenger vessels and vehicles, so putting them on ferries or putting them on trains, both with or without passengers at the same time. So again, how do we reduce the amount of vehicle miles traveled, particularly when it comes to trucks? And I do want to highlight one thing. So many folks on this call know that VMT, vehicle miles traveled, is bad, and we want to reduce the number of vehicle miles traveled. Well, when it comes to freight, it's sort of a little more complicated. We want to reduce the number of dangerous, dirty vehicle miles traveled, because you might need, let's say, 2 or 3 cargo bikes to replace what that van is moving. So actually the number of miles might be increased, but if it's by a safer, greener vehicle, then that's a good trade-off. So I often hesitate to use the VMT method when talking about a lot of last mile freight. Okay, next. Great. So some programs, I used to work for New York City's Department of Transportation in the Freight Mobility Office. I was one of 2 people doing all road freight for New York City. The group has since expanded, and they're doing really incredible work. I encourage you to check out some of their efforts. And one of the projects we worked on was off-hour delivery. So a lot of cities are working on this. there's no reason why all deliveries have to take place during rush hour, right? There are plenty of deliveries that can be made between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. when there's more room at the curb and less competition. Of course, there is money that is needed to retrofit different businesses. So this is particular for B2B, business to business. So you're going to need keyless entry if you trust your vendors. Yes, I own a restaurant. I am fine with my perishable items coming in when I'm not there. As long as the delivery driver comes in, they can put it straight into the refrigerator, and that's great. When my staff comes in the morning, they can get working right away because they're not waiting on delivery. It's also something that a lot of the trucking companies prefer. The drivers don't have to get sit in traffic. They don't have to compete for space for loading and unloading. The only challenge is making sure that folks feel secure and their safety, as well as noise issues. And then there's the zero emission zones for freight. So this is something that's been pushed a lot internationally. In Europe, about 30 cities had signed on to make sure there is a zero emission zone specifically for freight by the year 2030. The Netherlands said, oh, we're going to do all of our cities well before then. And starting on the 1st of this year, Amsterdam actually put into place a zero emission zone for freight. So a very specific part of the city, you are not allowed to actually go in with a dirty vehicle. But if that's the case, and if I'm a business and I don't have a clean vehicle and I have to get somewhere, then we need different types of infrastructure like consolidation facilities and micro hubs so that I can transfer to a cleaner vehicle, whether it's my own or I'm working with a third-party logistics provider. Next slide. There's also some tech solutions. And, just because we have tech doesn't mean we need to be using it. So here's an example on the top. This is a program called Flex Curb that I worked on when I lived abroad in Europe. And there's a lot of companies out there that are digitizing the curb for cities, right? So you can actually see, well, what regulations are where and how is that curb actually being used? Because then DOTs can figure out, oh, maybe we need to change the regulations here and there. And oh, we're seeing there's a lot of trouble with trucks trying to get access to the curb here. Maybe we need to dedicate more space to loading and unloading. So those types of systems or routing technology that helps trucks navigate where they should and shouldn't be, those are great types of technology. I have some issues with some of the other technologies. So there are companies out there that will do reservations for loading zones. That works only under very specific circumstances. So if you have a supermarket delivery, for example, that is going to be a full tractor trailer and that is going to be a several hours long unloading process. Sure, maybe you can make a reservation in advance. But if you're doing a quick delivery and you only have a couple of minutes and you are just bringing a brown e-commerce package into an apartment, you don't have time to figure out or make a reservation to a spot. When you go call the cable guy, right? The big joke is they'll say, okay, we'll be there sometime between the hours of 11 and 1. And that's because they have no idea how long their customer is going to be before you. They have no idea how backed up the schedule is going to get, and they have no idea what the traffic is going to look like. So again, a lot of companies tout these types of technologies. I think that they're really just flashy. We've got small delivery robots. To me, it's just a gimmick. It's not going to really move what we need to move. And we don't need tech for tech's sake. And one of the biggest challenges is, again, elected officials and even planners who don't know anything about freight will often see something shiny and sexy and say, oh yeah, we have problem A, this is a solution, we'll just accept it and start using it, not understanding whether or not that's actually the solution that we need. It might be a solution that's looking for a very specific problem that isn't what is currently there. Okay, next slide. So the big challenge that is street design. So here are some photos from Amsterdam that I took a number of years ago to show that everything in Europe isn't perfect, because we tend to put everybody in Europe up on a pedestal in the US. And so the upper left corner, that's actually an electric vehicle, great, but it's parked on a sidewalk because there's very, very narrow streets. So when you have older cities, you've got this challenge of having issues around the street design. The upper right, that's a bike lane that truck is parked in. Now the bottom image is great. That is a dedicated truck loading and unloading zone. And if you can see, there's enough space for the truck and that lift gate on the back of the truck and some more room for the driver to actually unload and load items. So all really, really important to recognize. And I do want to call out the complete streets ideas. There's a lot of strategies out there for those of you who don't know complete streets. It's essentially how do we design our streets so that they are safer for everybody and can really encourage some active transportation and are safe for cyclists and pedestrians and more. And again, truck drivers are also part of the vulnerable population, but so many complete street strategies lack freight considerations. If you are not going to design and include loading zones that are dedicated only to truck loading and unloading, if you are not going to design spaces for cargo bikes to be able to park, then there's no way you're going to be able to have a safe street. And one quick thing, it's not just about having the right loading zones in the right location. It's also about enforcement. You might come upon a street and you're a truck driver looking for a place to park. That loading zone may already be full, in which case you either have the chance of circling the block, adding to congestion and emissions, or you're just going to double park because there might not be time. Now, the vehicle that's parked in the loading zone might not be legal. There are a lot of times where we have personal cars that are parked in a truck loading and unloading zone. And so without proper enforcement and with limited numbers of loading zones, we end up with bad behavior. And again, trucking companies don't want to, drivers don't want to put themselves in harm's way, but it's about time and money. And so that's what wins every single time. Okay, next slide. And we're just about done here. So this is an example from this program called Delivering the Goods. The American Institute of Architects, the New York chapter, worked with Stantec engineering and planning firm to come up with some examples of what future streets can and should look like. So the top image is for mid to high density cities. It shows, you can have a micro hub that's inside a building, a former storefront. You could even use spaces on the street. So these areas in goldenrod, you will, that's where we can have dedicated spaces for trucks, for cargo bikes. We have dedicated spaces for delivery lockers. And these are the types of street designs that we need to consider. More cities in America are looking towards Europe for containerized waste instead of having trash all over the streets. Some cities have alleyways, so it's out of the public right of way, but some don't. And so you have even more challenges for freight. How do we make sure that we get trash off of the sidewalk, but also not spilling out to the street? So these are all big issues that we have in the industry. And then the final slide. So going back to future ideology of what my dream is for folks to consider is freight is public transportation. I will repeat that. Freight is public transportation. A company is not like, well, this is just my random stuff in the back of that truck. Everything we eat, everything we wear, everything we throw out in the backs of trucks, and we need to be sort of held accountable and recognize that our actions impact the movement of goods. And it is very different than personal private vehicles, which tend to get a lot of money and a lot of time from the government, unfortunately. It's important to know that fleets come in different shapes and sizes. Not everybody are these big international companies that have a lot of money and staff. And even those bigger companies have challenges. UPS just announced they're going to be laying off tens of thousands of people and shutting down about 70 facilities because they've had such a challenge with Amazon as a customer. So there's some really, really big challenges even for the bigger companies. Don't let high tech become a distraction. Again, this is not just for freight, but we see it in freight a lot, particularly because we don't have some of the expertise. The rules and regulations need to be realistic. So, I've just scratched the surface of in this presentation, but there are so many different policies and rules and regulations that cities put into place without actually understanding how freight works. And as a result, things are just not going to work. They may have the best intentions. You certainly want to make things cleaner and safer, right? We have high asthma rates, particularly in environmental justice communities. Black and brown children are like 5 times more likely to be hospitalized for asthma, and they also live where there are a significant number of warehousing operations. So you have a lot of truck movement. We need to fix that, and we need to make our roads safer. But if you design certain rules and programs that don't understand how things actually work, we're never going to solve those problems. And so it's really, really important that advocates and elected officials and government themselves understand that. It takes a lot of tools. There's not just one size fits all. We see a lot of advocates sort of not say anything about freight and then say, ooh, we need loading zones. Great. Once we do loading zones, the problem's solved, right? Of course, that's not true. We need a lot of support for a wide variety of different solutions. We need to make sure drivers are safe. We need all different types of street typologies to consider freight. And we need better education around freight planning. Again, not just advocates and elected officials, but other transportation planners. I can't tell you how many times I've been told, oh, you work in freight? How niche. Freight is the widest, biggest part of transportation, but it is considered niche because very few people are looking into it or think that the work they do touches freight. But it is so much more complex. Big love to my friends that work in bike planning or transit planning, but the amount of knowledge and experience and expertise that a freight planner has to have is thousands of times more than other transportation professionals, because we have to be experts at land use. We need to be experts on operations and the private sector and businesses and street design. And it goes on and on. And so we really need to do a better job, the freight industry, on helping everyone recognize and better understand freight, which is why I thank you guys so much for letting me be here. And that's that. I know it was a really condensed presentation. The last one is just my information. So thank you. I know that was a lot in a very short period of time. But yeah, thank you for listening, and happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Even though everyone is muted, I think we're all giving you a very loud round of applause. That was extremely informative and so helpful. Thank you so much for taking the time and consolidating all of that amazing information into such a comprehensive 45-minute slide deck. So I would like to just start off by saying that we have a lot of really good questions for you. And I know that there's a good chance we might go over in time. We only have 10 minutes, but being short on the responses might be helpful, so we can try to get through all of them. But I'm just going to try to start from the top and see how many we can get through. I thought most stores receive deliveries in the back and or in the early morning when there's less traffic. And I know that you mentioned, it'd be really nice to have them happening earlier on. So maybe talk through that a little bit more.
Sure. I mean, it totally depends on the design of your city and building. Bigger strip malls, maybe. I actually, unfortunately, live across the street from a strip mall. It's great, people watching. Very poorly designed. So you actually have massive tractor trailers that enter the strip mall where passenger vehicles have to enter, and then they have to wind their way through the parking lot to actually get to big loading bays. And this is not a very high dense area. So it totally depends on the street design, but unfortunately that is not the case. Some do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's great to know. Okay, someone else. So there's a lot of myth busting going on here. Someone else said, I heard that 1 in 10 of the total number of trips are made by freight. Is that a fairly accurate figure? So it's just like 1 in 10 trips in general.
Transportation trips?
Yes.
I don't know.
They said full stop. Yeah.
Don't know that specific. I don't know if anyone's quantified that. Yeah, I don't know, is that by, which mode? I do know that they're the most important ones.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just getting at the volume of freight trips compared to other, personal trips. So it's
Well,
yeah, so it
and
yeah,
again,
depends
well,
on the
now with
corridor, absolutely.
it totally
Yeah.
depends now with, again, the rise in e-commerce. There's a lot more movements by trucks, but again, are you replacing, a walk or a transit trip with
Hmm.
a truck, with multiple trucks, or are you replacing, you know, 10 people in their suburban communities driving to a store versus a single
Right.
truck, in which case that there's so many different variables.
Right. Yeah. No, and there's some discussion in the chat now about, it depends on the corridor. So, there might be, there's specific, like where I live in Chicago, there's like specific truck routes that I'm sure obviously there's more freight going on in there.
Mhm.
So 3 and 10 are commuters, 6 and 10 is local, 1 and 10 is freight kind of thing. So order of magnitude. But yeah, we can, it's good food for thought. Okay, moving on to the next question. And this is one that I think is interesting too, is okay, we have a car and live in a car dependent area, so we use free shipping quite a bit. What's a way to reconsider this? And there was some camaraderie in the chat that, someone said same here. I think if we had some pricing for the drop off, then there would be more incentives for shippers to actually consolidate the shipments. Half the time, if I tell Amazon to deliver later, it shows up sooner anyway. So,
Yeah.
how can we as consumers or, just people, uh, you know, reconsider, some of our decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not also meant to shun anybody. There are some times that, that's your only option, right? And e-commerce has certainly been just really wonderful for people who are homebound, or people who just can't afford getting their goods any other way. Um, I think, first of all, it's just understanding your consumption behavior, right? Do I need those things in the first place? Obviously, there are some things you absolutely do need. Again, so much of this is advocacy and just spreading this word. And the more people that have these sort of conversations and say these things out loud, the better it is. Talking to elected officials, I don't want there to be heavy-handedness. We don't want to have certain mandates, but wouldn't it be great if there was no such thing as free shipping, first of all? That has totally destroyed our roads. Amazon Prime is one of the worst things ever. But wouldn't it be great if maybe there's a mandate that, the default doesn't have to be same day? I think so much of it is, again, your consumption and recognizing your habits, and a lot of it's the reverse logistics. And, don't order 5 of something when you know you're only going to keep one. You'd be surprised how much that can really impact.
That's so true. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of people do, in fact, buy multiple things to see if it fits and then, return it back. So,
Which I get, right? If you're
yeah,
not thinking about the system, like, oh my God, it's free. Why wouldn't I do
yeah,
this?
absolutely. Uh, yeah, that's very good insight. And yeah, I completely agree. I mean, just watching this, I think it's like awareness is such a big thing because I think people literally don't think about it at all. And they're just like,
Yeah.
oh, it's a huge benefit to me because it's free.
It's the
Um,
problem with
yeah.
freight is it's hidden in plain sight, right?
Yeah.
Everyone sees it. They're like, oh, I understand how this works. Like, it's
Hmm.
fine. Or oh, this truck, how many people go to a sustainability rally on their bicycles and get really angry about the trucks double parking, and, while they're standing there ordering something online,
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
disconnect is pretty wild.
Oh,
Again, not saying
absolutely.
all the freight companies are doing the right thing. I want to be very clear about that.
Yes. Okay, so are there examples of publicly owned or cooperative consolidation centers or micro hubs, or are they all specific to single shipping companies? So
It's a
like,
great
yeah.
question. It's a great question. So, as I mentioned last week, New York City DOT launched its first micro hub, but they did make it specific to one particular company. But I don't think that's not their goal.
Mm,
But for right now, they're just starting it that way. Obviously, companies, a company like Walmart maintains their entire supply chain, right? They own and operate their facilities and they deal with
yep,
their own trucking. But a true consolidation center is all these different companies coming together.
right.
This has been tested around the world. The biggest challenge is um, government has helped subsidize these when they are often privately managed. And as soon as the subsidy goes away, it fails. So we're trying to figure out how to make that work. And again, you can't compete with each other when it's like this free shipping, right? And that's the really big problem. We made things too cheap. And I haven't even gotten into tariffs, but
Oh my gosh, yeah.
obviously the supply chain industry is watching very closely and just like no idea what's going to happen. So I'll just mention that on the side.
Wow.
So as a follow-up to that last question of the publicly owned, so are there any in Europe that you're aware of? Because I feel like that is that a thing in other countries?
In Gothenburg, Sweden, they've worked on things like this right by their university. Again, even in Europe, they've tried doing it. One of the things I learned living abroad is we think the world of Europe, especially around the transportation industry, and they are way ahead of us, but they are far from perfect. And it was a little bit of a like never meet your heroes kind of experience for me. Things are not as far along as I expected. And they understand that they need more government funding for different programs, but often after a pilot's over, money goes away and maybe those projects don't continue. So, and that's for freight and for all types of transportation. So Gothenburg, Sweden is the first one that comes to mind. They had tried to do stuff in Japan also. I know that's not Europe, but certainly search online Michael Brown, Browne. It's a professor at Gothenburg, and he's done a lot of research on urban consolidation centers.
Great tip. Okay, moving along here. There's a few about drone deliveries. So wasn't Amazon experimenting with drone deliveries recently? Do you think that's going anywhere? Should it? What are the merits? And then there was some conversation about Zipline and how, so what are your thoughts on that? I've seen a lot of these wheeled delivery robots in my city. So and then So I think that kind of captures a lot of the drone.
I do not like drones. I think that is just shiny, sexy distraction. Now, there is a time and a place for drones. Drones are really helpful when you have to get somewhere that would be really dangerous for a human. So when you're investigating infrastructure that might be down, or you need to bring medication to a remote area, right? Like that's where aerial drones, I should say, make sense. There's a lot of talk about autonomous vehicles for passenger movement. There's also talk about that for freight. And if anything, I actually think it'll be freight first if this does happen. You have to worry a little bit less about the safety of the contents. If the milk spills inside a vehicle, that's not as bad as if a person is injured inside the back of an autonomous vehicle. But when it comes to the smaller, like sidewalk delivery robots, those are more of just a fad, or it's cute. I mean, the efficiencies are not there. And especially when it comes to aerial drones. I mean, the number of drones you would need, right? And there's a huge limitation of size. I mean, you wouldn't be able to see the sky. You wouldn't be able to hear yourselves think, right? So it'd only be able to be usable for something very specific. You're not moving a couch by drone, or if you are, now all of a sudden it's a helicopter, right? I don't think that there's any merit or value there. There are some companies that have tested, right? Again, it's like cutesy. The Google like delivering burritos in people's backyard. Actually, I think this was actually an example in Australia. And, just like, there's porch pirates. That's what we call folks that steal your package when it's left outside your door by UPS and FedEx and DHL. Well, the same thing happened with these aerial drones. They were dropping fast food, quick commerce, as we like to call it. And folks' dogs were in their backyard and they got to the food first. And that was it. The animals were eating, their deliveries. So obviously, that's just one sort of fun example. But yeah, dogs ate their burrito. That's exactly what happened. So, I don't see value there. I think it's just a shiny, sexy distraction. I think there are very specific uses where drones can play huge value. It is not for last mile delivery.
So what about the Zipline technology? Do you have thoughts on that one?
No.
You can say no.
I think just anything that's drone, it's the same thing. It's
Got it.
They're all different aerial drones. It's just, it depends on which company, Amazon, Google, Zipline.
Okay, with consolidation centers, do the data show deliveries would be most efficiently and cheaply done by a single vendor per area, such as USPS?
Yes, exactly. So the goal is you bring a bunch of different carriers together to one location, and then you have a single provider doing that last mile. So it could be a third-party logistics provider. So, random companies that serve that way day to day. It could be a postal service doing that final mile. It could be multiple companies doing that last mile, but they each have their own geographical like territory, right? Where
Yep.
this one area is only going to be the U.S. Postal Service. This area is only going to be, blank company. We're seeing that more and more with waste collection. Again, in New York, so that's where my background is. The city's finally doing containerized waste management by zones. So it used to be, there was 20 stores on one street, let's say, and you're a private business, you can hire whatever waste hauler you wanted. So you could have 20 garbage trucks, in theory, on one street, like any given time. But instead, the city was like, wait a second, this is not efficient. This is absurd. And so it's sort of reverse consolidation. And instead, it's okay, we've designated this zone, this part of Manhattan or this part of Queens, and you have to apply to be given the right to work in this zone instead of having a million haulers come in, because obviously it's far more efficient to do it that way. So it's waste too, not just deliveries.
Okay, for cargo buses, who handles the packages? Does someone wait at the bus stop or does the bus driver handle them? How does that work while keeping buses on time for passengers?
Yeah, I mean, I picked that photo because I thought it was the prettiest I found. It totally depends on the situation. Folks are just, still sort of testing this. So for example, I'm working on a project where we're actually moving goods by cargo bike and ferry in New York City.
Okay.
So it's passenger ferry where we would move sort of the insides of a cargo bike. So they have like these rolling racks that can slide right into the bikes. But you would just move the racks onto the ferry, make sure it's strapped down. You got to make sure it's not in the way of passengers for egress. You have to make sure, as the person said, you can't slow down the schedule, right? For many of these are people first, this is passenger first movement.
Yep.
You cannot get in the way. So you need to load and unload very quickly, not delay the schedule. And you have to make sure it's safe. And you also still have to pay. So we're testing that right now. New York City is working on their blue highway plan. How do we do more middle and last mile by water? And there are goods delivered by bus in other countries, and it would be the logistics company that is responsible and takes on a lot of that responsibility. Obviously, there's insurance issues and payment and finances that all have to be decided, and those are all case by case.
Yep. Okay, so some apartment complexes have a delivery room where they receive packages for you. Does this count as a micro hub / delivery locker for the purposes of consolidation?
Yes, so I think I saw that person
Yeah,
was
that's
typing
what I
that right
thought
as
so
I
too.
as
Yeah.
I was talking about it. So yes, I would
Okay,
consider
great.
that exactly. Yes.
Okay, and then that's it for the questions in the chat. I think that I am personally, I mean, you teed it up a little bit about, I would be very curious if you can tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on tariffs and how they might impact freight. I think we're all, there's a lot going on there, and so we're all speculative, but any thoughts that you have, I think would be a good way
Honestly,
to close it up.
I don't know. None of us know what like tomorrow's going to bring. I'm always
Right?
surprised with
Yeah.
every day. So honestly, I can't even speculate. Like if you told me Godzilla was going to like, I don't know, walk on the shores of, San Francisco tomorrow, I'd say, yeah, that's probably plausible at this point. It's just like an insane time. There's a lot of back and forth. You know, uh, Typically you have a lot of businesses and trucking companies and truck drivers who are more conservative. Many have supported Donald Trump, and you see a lot of like a little bit of buyer's remorse. Um, but a lot of folks, I'm following in the trucking industry are like, oh, this is actually going to make things worse. Or, oh, we think that something's going to actually get delivered to China or somewhere else first so that then it can get to us because then they can avoid and find all these loopholes. Trump just announced there's going to be new rules that if you have a CDL, a commercial driver's license, and you're driving in the US, you have to speak English fluently because that's been a challenge. And everyone's like, well, great, because if things have to bypass the US border to be able to get in here cheaper and it's going to come through Mexico, now we're going to have a problem. So, like, it's all, cascading questions. Again, every day it seems like there's a new law. Every day it seems like there's something new with tariffs. I have no idea. I have no idea. Well before Trump was reelected, folks have been talking about nearshoring and onshoring, bringing manufacturing jobs closer. Also more as like not just economic growth, but redundancy for resilience. But yeah, nobody in the industry knows.
Nobody knows. Yeah. No, absolutely.
The
Okay, well,
to
thank
be
you.
clear, the White House doesn't know also. Just
Very,
nobody.
very true. Well, thank you so much for trying to speculate that and just for being a part of this conversation. I learned a lot today. I'm sure I can speak on the behalf of everyone else attending and saying that they learned a lot today, and really appreciate everyone coming on. And I'm going to turn it back over to Paula and Bo. But thank you so much. Again, this was very informative, and hope to see everyone at the next one.